They didn't thank her. They handcuffed her. She was still wearing gloves, still had the man's blood drying in the creases of her knuckles. When the two men in suits stepped through the trauma bay doors and told everyone else to leave, the monitors were still beeping. The surgeon hadn't even closed yet, and the woman who had kept that soldier alive for the last 9 minutes was standing in the corner, trying to peel off a latex glove, when one of the agents put a hand on her shoulder and said, quietly, like it was nothing, "We need you to come with us." Her name was Jess Calloway, and until that evening, nobody in the Harlan County Regional Medical Center had thought much about her at all. Jess had been working the overnight intake desk for 11 months. She checked insurance cards. She updated patient files. She handed people clipboards and told them to fill out the forms completely, both sides. She wore her hair in a bun that was always slightly crooked, had a coffee stain on her left sneaker that had been there since February, and said, "Have a good one," at the end of every interaction, even to people who were clearly not going to have a good one. Nobody knew where she'd come from. Her paperwork said Pittsburgh. Her accent said nowhere in particular. The head nurse, a sharp-eyed woman named Dolores Fries, had hired her after a 2-minute interview because they were short-staffed, and Jess had shown up wearing clean shoes and made eye contact the whole time. That was the bar. Clean shoes, eye contact. The ER staff was friendly enough to her. Not warm, but friendly. The way people are to the person who keeps the desk in order and never complains about being handed extra tasks. She fetched things. She relayed messages. She once spent 40 minutes holding the hand of an elderly man who had come in alone with chest pain and was scared, and she did it without being asked. And when Dr. Haynes walked by and noticed, he gave her a little nod like, "Not bad." That was the most recognition she'd received in 11 months. She didn't seem to want more than that. On the night everything changed, Jess had been on hour 9 of a 12-hour shift. The ER had been running hot. A 3-car accident on Route 7 had sent 4 people in, 2 of them serious, and the staff was stretched thin. She was at the desk re-logging a billing error from 6 weeks ago when the ambulance bay doors crashed open and the paramedics came through faster than usual. And the man on the gurney was in camouflage pants and no shirt. And there was so much blood that one of the paramedics had both hands pressed flat against the man's abdomen and was still losing ground. GSW, lower left quadrant, possible femoral involvement, pressure's been dropping since mile marker 4. The paramedic called out, "We've got a BP of 68 over palp." Jess stood up from the desk. She didn't know why she did it, or maybe she did and just didn't think about it consciously. She walked to the edge of the intake desk, then past it, and followed the gurney down the hall at a brisk clip, the way a person does when they've spent years moving through controlled chaos, and their legs remember the pace, even when their brain hasn't caught up. Dr. Kerrigan was already in Trauma 1, gloves on, assessing. 2 nurses flanked the gurney. A resident stood near the crash cart looking pale. It was a full room, or what passed for full in a county hospital on a Tuesday night, and Jess walked into it like she had every right to be there. Nobody stopped her. Later, people would say they assumed she'd been called in for something, that she belonged there. But the truth was simpler. She walked like someone who knew exactly what she was walking into, and that kind of certainty is almost impossible to question in real time. The man on the table was young, late 20s, maybe. His body was all lean muscle and old scars, the kind of scars that don't come from accidents. There was a tattoo on his forearm, a trident, small and precise. And Jess clocked it in the half-second she had before the situation pulled her full attention back to what mattered, which was the blood. "BP's not coming back," the nurse said. "We're losing him." "I need more suction," Dr. Kerrigan said. She was good. Jess had watched her work before from a distance, and she was methodical and unflappable. But right now she was working with what she had, and what she had wasn't enough. Jess stepped up alongside the gurney on the left side. She didn't push anyone out of the way. She just moved into the space between the nurse and the IV pole and looked at the wound and said, in a voice that was very calm and very quiet, "He needs internal hemorrhage control. The vessel's not going to hold with external compression." Dr. Kerrigan looked up. "What?" "The bleeding is proximal. You can pack it all night and it won't matter. Jess was already reaching for the supply cart. She knew where things were in this room. She had organized this room. She had stood in this room 100 times handing things over and pretending she didn't notice the procedures. I need a Foley catheter, 18 gauge, and whatever you have closest to an arterial clamp. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when someone says something that shouldn't make sense but somehow does. You're the intake coordinator, Dr. Kerrigan said. Yes. Jess didn't look up, and he has less than 3 minutes before that window closes. So I need you to make a call right now, doctor. 3 seconds. That's how long Dr. Kerrigan looked at her. 3 full seconds, which is a very long time when someone is bleeding out on your table. Then she said, give her what she needs. What happened in the next 9 minutes was the thing that everyone in that room would spend the next several weeks trying to explain to people who hadn't been there. Jess worked clean. That was the first thing they noticed. No wasted movement, no hesitation, no double-checking with her eyes whether what her hands were doing was right. She threaded the catheter into the wound tract with the precision of someone who had done it before. Not in a simulation, not in a classroom, but in the real thing, in conditions that were probably worse than this. She inflated the balloon at the tip to create a temporary occlusion, buying time, slowing the bleed from the inside while the surgeons could actually get ahead of it. Pressure's stabilizing, the nurse said. Her voice had gone up half an octave, 68/40, 72/44. Keep it there, Jess said quietly. She was looking at the man's face. His color was still bad, but his chest was moving more steadily. He's going to need the OR in the next 8 minutes. The occlusion won't hold longer than that. Dr. Kerrigan was already on the phone to the surgical suite. The resident, a young man named Tobias, who had been standing near the crash cart looking pale, later said that the thing that struck him most wasn't the technique. It was her hands. They hadn't shaken, not once. And her voice when she spoke was the flattest, most even voice he had ever heard in a trauma room. Not cold, just settled, like the room being in chaos was fine with her. Like she had stood in worse rooms and been less rattled. The patient made it to the OR. His pressure was 86/52 by the time they wheeled him out, which wasn't good, but was survivable. Dr. Kerrigan walked alongside the gurney and then turned back at the door and looked at Jess, who was already pulling off her gloves. Who are you? Dr. Kerrigan said. Intake, Jess said. And that's when the men in suits walked in. There were 2 of them. The one who spoke first was tall, gray at the temples, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been deciding things for a very long time. He introduced himself as Agent Burrell. The one behind him didn't offer a name. He was younger, watchful, standing slightly to the left of the door in a position that was not quite blocking it but could become that very quickly. Agent Burrell looked at Jess for a long moment. Then he looked at the blood on the floor, then back at her. Ms. Calloway, he said, we'd like you to come with us. Is he going to be okay? She said. Burrell blinked. Excuse me? The patient. He's going to surgery. Is he going to be okay? Burrell paused. That's not something I'm in a position to tell you. Then I'd like to finish my shift, Jess said, and turned back to the supply cart. The second agent moved then, not aggressively, but with purpose, stepping forward enough to make clear that the conversation was not optional. Jess noticed this without looking at him directly. She noticed the weight shift in his step, the slight angle of his body. She set down the catheter packaging she'd been collecting and turned around. All right, she said quietly. They walked her to a small family consultation room at the end of the east corridor. The one with the chairs upholstered in blue fabric and the box of tissues on the table. The room where doctors told people things they didn't want to hear. Jess sat in one of the blue chairs. Agent Burrell sat across from her. The other agent stood near the wall with his hands loose at his sides. Burrell set a thin folder on the table. He didn't open it. The man you just treated, he said. His name is Warrant Officer Dominic Sharp. He is active duty, assigned to a unit I'm not going to name in this room. He was recovered from a county road approximately 4 miles east of here at 2147 this evening. He was not supposed to be in this state. He was not supposed to be anywhere near here. He paused. Are you following me, Miss Calloway? Yes, she said. Good. So you can imagine why his presence here, in these circumstances, is something we take very seriously. Burrell folded his hands on the table. And you can imagine why the way you just intervened in his care is also something we take very seriously. I kept him alive, Jess said. You performed a field-adapted Riboa procedure in a county emergency room without credentials, without authorization, and with a degree of technical proficiency that is. He stopped. Not typical for an intake coordinator. The room was very quiet. The HVAC system hummed above them. Where did you learn to do that, Ms. Calloway? Jess looked at him. Her expression hadn't changed since they'd walked into the room. Not tighter, not looser, not afraid. Just the same even flatness that Tobias the resident had noticed, the thing that read as calm but was actually something different, something older. I'd like to know, she said carefully, why there are federal agents in this hospital asking about a wounded soldier. That's not a standard notification protocol. Burrell's jaw shifted slightly. That's not something I know it's not, Jess said. I'm telling you that you asking me questions while not answering mine tells me something about why you're really here. And it's not because you're concerned about my credentials. Silence. The agent near the wall, the young one who hadn't given his name, moved his weight from his left foot to his right. His unit was on a domestic training exercise, Burrell said finally, his voice dropping just slightly. That exercise is classified. The details of how he came to be on that road, in that condition, are part of an active internal investigation. Internal, Jess repeated. Yes. She let that word sit in the air for a moment. So someone on your side did this to him. Burrell didn't answer. But he didn't say no either, and in Jess Calloway's experience, that was the same thing. She looked down at her hands. The blood had dried in the lines of her knuckles. She had a small cut on her left index finger. She didn't remember getting it, and the dried blood had settled into it, like the cut was older than it was. I served, she said quietly. 8 years. Combat medic, 75th Ranger Regiment. 2 tours in Syria, 1 in Mali, 1 I can't tell you about, because I signed something that said I couldn't. I got out 4 years ago, and I've been working front-of-house jobs since then, because it's easier than express to every hiring committee what I know how to do and why I know how to do it. She paused. So to answer your question, Agent Burrell, I learned to do that in places that your folder probably has no record of. Burrell sat very still. Can I see your service record? You can request it through the proper channels, Jess said. It'll take a while. Some of it's redacted. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the folder he hadn't opened. Then he looked at the wall. We may need to bring you in for a formal debrief, he said finally. I understand, Jess said. You're not free to leave the county for the next. I wasn't planning to leave the county, she said. I was planning to go back to the intake desk. I have 2 more hours on my shift. Another silence. We're going to have questions, Burrell said. I'm sure you are, Jess said. She stood up from the blue chair, smoothed the front of her scrubs, and picked up the ID badge she'd set on the corner of the table. You can find me at the front desk. I'll be the one handing out clipboards. She walked back down the east corridor alone. The ER had quieted somewhat in the 20 minutes she'd been in that room. The overhead lights buzzed in their particular way. A low, fluorescent drone she'd stopped hearing after the first week. The floors smelled like antiseptic and something underneath that, something older, like rubber and overworked air. Dolores Fries was standing near the nursing station with a chart in her hand and a look on her face that was trying very hard to be neutral. The feds are still here, Dolores said. I know, Jess said. You want to tell me what's going on? Jess thought about this for a moment. She looked down the hall at the room where Warrant Officer Dominic Sharp was no longer lying, was now somewhere up on the 3rd floor, with people working to put him back together in ways that would last longer than 9 minutes. I kept someone alive, she said. The rest of it's above my pay grade. Dolores looked at her for a long time. Dolores was 61 years old and had been a nurse for 37 of those years, and she had, in that time, developed a very accurate sense of when people were telling the truth and when they were telling a version of it. You okay? Dolores asked. I'm fine, Jess said. You've got blood on your, I know. Jess was already moving toward the supply closet. I'll change before I go back to the desk. The thing nobody knew, the thing Jess had spent 4 years working very hard to keep nobody from knowing, was that she had come to Harlan County deliberately. Not for the job, exactly. The job was cover, though not in a dramatic sense. She wasn't running from anyone, wasn't hiding from a specific threat. It was more that the things she had done and seen and been asked to do in 8 years of service had left her with a very particular understanding of how the world worked, and that understanding made it very difficult to stand inside most versions of normal life without feeling like she was watching a movie from the outside of the theater. Harlan County was quiet. That was why she'd come. The mountains outside town turned gold in October, and the coffee at the diner on Route 9 was genuinely bad, which was somehow comforting, and the people at the hospital were kind without requiring anything from her. It was the closest to peaceful she'd managed. She hadn't planned to blow her cover, such as it was, over a gunshot wound in Trauma 1. But she had looked at Dominic Sharp's face and his tattoo and the kind of scars that don't come from accidents. And something in her that was older than thought had said, "Not tonight." The debrief request came 3 days later in the form of a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end wasn't Burrell. It was a woman, measured, professional, with the particular flat effect of someone who had learned long ago to give nothing away in their voice. "Miss Calloway. My name is Agent Vance. I'm coordinating the investigation into the incident involving Warrant Officer Sharp." "Okay," Jess said. "I want to be transparent with you." A pause. What happened to Sharp was not authorized by his chain of command. We have reason to believe his extraction from the operational air area was compromised by someone inside the contractor network that supports his unit. Jess was in the parking lot of the grocery store. She stayed very still. "You're telling me this because you saved his life, and because the individuals who put him on that road are aware that he made it to the hospital." Agent Vance's voice stayed flat and professional. "Which means they're aware of you." Jess looked up at the sky. It was the kind of pale November blue that has no warmth in it at all. "Are you offering me protection, or are you telling me I need it?" Another pause. Longer. "Both," Agent Vance said. Jess sat with that for a moment. "Is he going to be okay?" she said. "Sharp. He's going to survive," Agent Vance said. "He's been asking about the woman who treated him." "What did you tell him?" "We told him her name was Calloway and that she worked intake at the hospital." A brief pause that might have been the closest Agent Vance came to a smile. "He said that didn't sound right." Jess almost laughed. It surprised her, the sudden small pressure of it in her chest. She hadn't laughed at much in a long time. "Tell him I said he's welcome," she said. "The investigation took 4 months. Jess was interviewed 7 times. She drove to the federal field office in Lexington twice and spoke to people whose names she was given, but whose job titles she wasn't. She answered the questions she could answer and declined the ones she couldn't without explaining why she was declining. And nobody pushed her on it, which told her, as clearly as anything, that they had already pulled her file and knew exactly why. The contractor. A name she eventually learned was associated with a logistics firm, with 3 innocuous words in its title and connections to 3 other firms that had connections to things that weren't innocuous at all, was under a separate investigation that she was not involved in, and that moved on a timetable she had no visibility into. What she did know, because Agent Vance told her 6 weeks in, was that Dominic Sharp had been carrying information. Not documents, not anything physical, but names. A list of names he'd memorized over the course of 6 months, because someone had asked him to, and because he'd understood that the kind of information that gets people killed shouldn't exist anywhere that can be deleted. Someone had tried to make sure those names never made it anywhere useful. They almost succeeded, Agent Vance said. Almost, Jess agreed. She saw Sharp once, in person. It was about 2 months after that night, when he was well enough to move around without pain being written all over his face. Though she could see him managing it. The slight carefulness in how he held his left side when he sat down. He came to the hospital on a Thursday afternoon, not in uniform. He asked for her by name at the intake desk, which was somewhat awkward because she was the one staffing the intake desk. "That's me," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone trying to reconcile two different mental images. You're the one who. Yes, she said. Can I help you? He put his hands on the counter. His forearms were resting flat, and she could see the trident tattoo, and under it a small new scar she hadn't put there. From the ower, probably, from the work that came after hers. I wanted to say thank you, he said. They told me you probably saved my life. More than probably. You would have made it, Jess said, which was not true, but which was the kind of thing you say. He shook his head slightly. He had gray eyes and the direct look of someone accustomed to being taken seriously, and right now he was directing that look at her with something in it that was more than gratitude, something more like recognition. You were Ranger Medic, he said. Not a question. I work intake, Jess said. Right. He nodded slowly. Right. Okay. He pushed off the counter, stood up straight, and tucked his hands into the pockets of his jacket. Well, thank you, Miss Calloway, for working intake. She handed him a clipboard out of reflex. He looked at it. That's for new patients, she said. Sorry. She took it back. He almost smiled. It was a small, crooked, painful-looking thing, but it was there. I hope it stays quiet for you, he said. It usually does, she said. Have a good one. He walked out through the automatic doors, and the cold November air came in around him for a moment, and then the doors slid closed. The hospital went on being a hospital. Doctor Kerrigan stopped by the desk 2 weeks after the incident and handed Jess a coffee and said, without making a big thing of it, I don't know what you did in a previous life, but whatever it was, I'm glad you brought some of it in here. Then she walked away before Jess could respond, which was probably why she said it that way. Dolores Freeze gave her a knowing look for approximately 4 months and never asked a single question. Tobias the resident told everyone who would listen what he had seen in Trauma 1. And eventually, the version that circulated through the hospital was something about 9 minutes and a catheter. And the calmest pair of hands anyone had ever seen. And that part was true, and Jess let it be true without adding anything to it. She went back to checking insurance cards and handing out clipboards and saying, have a good one at the end of every interaction. She got a new stain on her left sneaks, this time coffee from the machine on the second floor, which was marginally better than the one in the break room. She fixed the fluorescent light above the desk that had been flickering for 3 weeks because no one else had gotten around to it, and it was making her quietly crazy. In December, it snowed. The mountains outside town went white, and the parking lot froze over, and the night shift started getting longer because accidents brought people in from the dark. She was there for all of it, 7 to 7, twice a week, plus the occasional overnight when they were short. Nobody thought much about her. That was fine. That was, in fact, exactly what she wanted. But sometimes, on the slow nights, when the waiting room was empty and the monitors were quiet and the fluorescent lights hummed their low drone above her, she would look up at the ambulance bay doors and something in her would go still and alert. The oldest part of her, the part that had learned a long time ago to read the quality of silence and know the difference between quiet that was safe and quiet that was just waiting. And then the doors would stay closed, and she would go back to her paperwork, and the night would continue being ordinary. For now, that was enough.